Hello and welcome to this tech tip from Will. In this video I'll look at virtual machine configuration versions, a new feature to Windows 10 Hyper-V. By the end of this video you'll understand what virtual machine configuration versions are and why they're important. So let's get started. So what exactly are virtual machine configuration versions? Virtual Machine Configuration Versions is a brand new feature, first introduced in Windows 10 and Windows Server 2016 Hyper-V. Virtual Machine Configuration Versions, in a nutshell, determine which features you're able to use with your Hyper-V virtual machines. At the time that this video was recorded, there are 5 Virtual Machine Configuration versions available in Windows 10 Hyper-V. These are version 5.0, version 6.2, version 7.0, version 7.1, and version 8.0. The thing to remember here is the higher the configuration version, the more features the virtual machine has. For example, a virtual machine that has a configuration version of 8.0 will have more features than a virtual machine with a configuration version of 7.1. And a virtual machine with a configuration version of 7.1 will have more features than a virtual machine with a configuration version of 7.0. When creating Hyper-V virtual machines, just remember the higher the configuration version, the more features you'll have. Understand, though, the virtual machine configuration versions listed here are the configuration versions that were available at the time this video was recorded. In the future, it's likely that Microsoft will release newer virtual machine configuration versions. Therefore, I'd highly recommend that you visit the Microsoft website and do your research before you create your Hyper-V virtual machines. To fully understand virtual machine configuration versions, it's important that you also consider how the Windows 10 operating system is serviced. Before Windows 10, traditionally, Microsoft would release a new operating system every 4 or 5 years. When Microsoft releases an operating system, that operating system comes with a given set of features. That is, there are certain things that you can and cannot do with that operating system. Then, 4 or 5 years later, Microsoft would release a newer operating system which comes with an improved feature set. That is, the features included with the newer operating system would be more advanced than the features found in the previous operating system. Also, when newer operating systems enter the market, deployment of those operating systems into a live production network takes time, and it would likely result in a project for the administrator. With Windows 10, Microsoft announced that this servicing model would be changed in favour of a newer servicing model called Windows as a Service. The idea of Windows as a Service is that the Windows 10 operating system is continually improved and built upon. In other words, when new features are developed by Microsoft, these features are actually added to the Windows 10 operating system as an update, rather than to a newer operating system altogether. You may have heard rumours that Windows 10 is supposedly the last version of Windows ever to be released by Microsoft. Whether or not that is the case remains to be seen, but the concept of Windows as a Service certainly makes this a possibility. Keeping your Windows 10 computer up to date with the latest builds is simply a matter of installing the latest Windows updates. So, how is Windows as a Service relevant to virtual machine configuration versions? Well, Hyper-V is an excellent example of a feature that is continually improved through Windows as a Service. When Microsoft releases a newer build of Windows 10, Hyper-V is often a feature that receives an update. To appreciate this better, consider the following table. First of all, let's go back to the older servicing model before Windows 10 was released. Windows Server 2012 R2 and Windows 8.1 were the last operating systems released by Microsoft before Windows as a Service was implemented. With Windows Server 2012 R2 and Windows 8.1, any Hyper-V or client Hyper-V virtual machine created by an administrator, regardless of whether it is a Generation 1 or a Generation 2 virtual machine, will have a configuration version of 5.0. These virtual machines can use all the Hyper-V features included in Windows Server 2012 R2 or Windows 8.1. When Microsoft released their first ever builds of Windows 10, a new virtual machine configuration version was introduced, version 6.2. With the first builds of Windows 10, when the administrator creates a Hyper-V virtual machine, they're able to choose which virtual machine configuration version they want, version 6.2 or version 5.0. Any build of Windows 10 before build 10.565 supports both virtual machine configuration versions. If the administrator were to choose version 6.2, these virtual machines can use all the features of version 5.0, plus the administrator is able to use some new features as well. These new features include the ability to hot add and remove memory, use Secure Boot with Linux virtual machines, create production checkpoints, administer the virtual machine using PowerShell Direct, and use virtual machine grouping. However, it's worth noting at this point that version 6.2 virtual machines cannot be used with earlier releases of Hyper-V, such as on Windows Server 2012 R2 or Windows 8.1, since these hypervisors only support version 5.0 virtual machines. When Microsoft released build 10.565 of Windows 10, Hyper-V received yet another feature update. And, to accommodate this, another virtual machine configuration version was introduced, this time version 7.0. With Windows 10 build 10.565 or later, the administrator can create virtual machines with a configuration version of 7.0, 6.2 or 5.0. Both versions of 6.2 and 5.0 are backward compatible with versions of Hyper-V that supports them. Version 7.0 virtual machines include all the features of version 6.2 and 5.0 virtual machines. On top of that, the administrator can also use the Virtual Trusted Platform module, a new Hyper-V feature of 7.0 virtual machines. Of course, version 7.0 virtual machines can only run on Windows 10 build 10.565 or later. If your Windows 10 Hyper-V computer is using a build that is older than 10.565, you'll first have to run all of your Windows updates before your computer can support version 7.0 virtual machines. The next virtual machine configuration version came not with a newer Windows 10 build, but with Windows Server 2016 Technical Preview 5. Windows Server 2016 Technical Preview 5 is a beta release of Windows Server 2016. With Windows Server 2016 Technical Preview 5, Virtual Machine Configuration version 7.1 was released. With it came support for version 7.0, version 6.2 and version 5.0 virtual machines. Version 7.1 virtual machines support all the features of the previous configuration versions, but also add a new feature, Virtual Machine Multiple Queries. This brings us to today. At the time this video was recorded, Microsoft's most recent build of Windows 10 came with their anniversary update. With the Windows 10 anniversary update, Hyper-V received a large feature update. Windows 10 Hyper-V computers that have the anniversary update installed support a new virtual machine configuration version, version 8.0. Backward compatibility with version 7.1, 7.0, 6.2 and version 5.0 virtual machines is still retained, however. You can obtain the Windows 10 anniversary update by installing it manually or simply by running all your Windows updates. With the anniversary update installed, version 8.0 virtual machines are then available to you. Version 8 virtual machines come with the following new features: Xslave support, key storage device, guest virtualization-based security support, nested virtualization, virtual process account, and large memory VMs. Hopefully now you can start to see how Windows as a Service works and the importance of keeping your Windows 10 Hyper-V computer up to date. To better understand virtual machine configuration versions a little better, I'll now change over to my Windows 10 professional computer with Hyper-V installed to show you how configuration versions work. This Windows 10 Hyper-V computer already has the anniversary update installed. If you're unsure which build of Windows 10 you are running, click the Start button and search for WinVer. If I press Enter, this will open the About Windows dialog box. Notice at the top we can see the OS build number. In my case, the build number is 14393.105. At the time this video was recorded, this is a very up-to-date build. Therefore, I should have no problem taking advantage of the latest Hyper-V features. Remember, if your Windows 10 Hyper-V computer is not running the latest build of Windows 10, you could be missing out on the latest Hyper-V features. I'll now close the About Windows dialog box and will return to my desktop. Next, if you would like to see which virtual machine configuration versions are supported by your Windows 10 Hyper-V computer, open the Start menu and search for Powershell. Next, right-click on Powershell and select the option Run as Administrator. This will open an administrative PowerShell prompt. From here, run the commandlet get VM host supported version. When I run this command, PowerShell will return a list of supported virtual machine configuration versions. As you can see, my Windows 10 Hyper-V computer fully supports configuration version 5.0 through 8.0. If you cannot see the latest configuration versions listed here, you're likely to need to update Windows 10 to the latest build. I will now close PowerShell and will return to my desktop. From the desktop of my Windows 10 computer, I'll now open Hyper-V Manager from the Start menu. Once in Hyper-V Manager, notice all of the virtual machines I created in the last few videos have been removed. I now have no virtual machines running on this Hyper-V computer. I've done this on purpose so that I can better demonstrate how virtual machine configuration versions work. First, I'll create a virtual machine. To do this, I'll right-click on my Windows 10 Hyper-V computer, PC1, point to New, and select Virtual Machine. This will open up the new Virtual Machine wizard. Using this wizard, I'll create a simple Generation 1 virtual machine named VM1. Once the virtual machine has been created, it will appear listed under the Virtual Machines section in Hyper-V Manager. Notice that this virtual machine has a configuration version of 8.0, the highest configuration version supported on this Windows 10 Hyper-V computer. If you watched carefully as I created the virtual machine, or if you saw our previous video on creating a virtual machine, you may recall that at no point in the new Virtual Machine wizard was the administrator given the ability to choose the configuration version of the virtual machine. When a virtual machine is created in Hyper-V Manager, the virtual machine is always created with the highest supported configuration version. Since my VM1 virtual machine is using the latest configuration version, it will have the latest Hyper-V features. This is all very well, but it does beg the question, is it possible to create a Hyper-V virtual machine with a lower configuration version for backward compatibility with earlier versions of Hyper-V? Well, quite simply, the answer is yes. You can create a Hyper-V virtual machine with a lower configuration version if you really want to. Keep in mind, though, that if you were to create a virtual machine with a lower configuration version, you'll lose the ability to use the newest Hyper-V features on that virtual machine. Unless you have a good reason to do so, I personally would recommend that you stick with the latest Hyper-V configuration versions. To create a virtual machine with a lower configuration version, the administrator must use Windows PowerShell. To show you how this is done, I will first open up an administrative PowerShell prompt from the Start menu. Once again, I will use the new VM commandlet to create a new Generation 1 virtual machine named VM2. Once I'm happy with the parameters I've chosen for my virtual machine, I will add the version switch. The version switch allows the administrator to choose the configuration version for the virtual machine. In this case, I'll choose to make this virtual machine a version 5.0 virtual machine. If I run the commandlet, my VM2 virtual machine will be created. If I close out of Windows PowerShell and return to Hyper-V Manager, you can see my VM2 virtual machine listed in the Virtual Machines section. Notice, however, that my VM2 virtual machine has a configuration version of 5.0, meaning that I cannot use the latest Hyper-V features with this virtual machine. To prove that this is the case, I will right-click on my VM1 virtual machine and will open up the settings for the virtual machine. Notice, among the hardware settings on the left, there's an option for security. This is a new feature added for version 8.0 virtual machines. If I close the settings for my VM1 virtual machine and open the settings for my VM2 virtual machine, notice that the security option has disappeared. This is because the security feature was not available at the time version 5.0 virtual machines were released. To make the security feature available for my VM2 virtual machine, the virtual machine's configuration version needs to be upgraded. I will now close out of the virtual machine settings and will show you how to upgrade a virtual machine's configuration version. To upgrade a virtual machine, all you have to do is right-click on the virtual machine and select Upgrade Configuration Version. After selecting this option, notice I get a warning message. In short, this message is telling me that after I upgrade this virtual machine, I will not be able to migrate this virtual machine to a computer running an earlier version of Hyper-V. When you're ready to upgrade your virtual machine, click the Upgrade button. The upgrade takes a matter of seconds to complete. You can see now that my VM2 virtual machine now has a configuration version of 8.0. It's worth noting at this point that if I right-click on my VM2 virtual machine again, notice that there is no option to revert the virtual machine back to a previous configuration version. Upgrading a virtual machine is a one-way ticket. Once you upgrade the virtual machine configuration version, you cannot downgrade it back. Before upgrading a Hyper-V virtual machine, make absolutely certain that this is what you want to do, and be sure to back up your virtual machine before you upgrade. Also, you may have noticed that when I upgraded my VM2 virtual machine, the configuration version went from version 5.0 straight to version 8.0. Versions 6.2, 7.0 and 7.1 were bypassed completely. When you upgrade a virtual machine's configuration version in Hyper-V, the virtual machine is always upgraded to the latest version supported by the hypervisor. Of course, you can also upgrade a virtual machine's configuration version using Windows PowerShell. To demonstrate this, I will open an administrative PowerShell prompt from the Start menu. Once in PowerShell, I will create a third virtual machine named VM3. The virtual machine will have a configuration version of 5.0. After I run the commandlet, notice that the VM3 virtual machine has appeared in Hyper-V Manager and has a configuration version of 5.0. To upgrade the configuration version using PowerShell, I'll run the commandlet update VM version. Next, I will add the name switch, followed by the name of the virtual machine you want to upgrade, which in my case is VM3. When I run this commandlet, I'm then prompted to confirm that I want to proceed with the updates. To acknowledge this, I'll then type in the letter Y for yes, and will press Enter. If I close PowerShell and return to Hyper-V Manager, notice that the VM3 virtual machine now has a configuration version of 8.0. Well, that covers virtual machine configuration versions. In the next video, I will delve under the hood of my virtual machines by looking at the virtual machine configuration files in Hyper-V. I hope you've enjoyed this video and found it useful. For more videos, please see our YouTube page. And remember to support our videos by liking them and by subscribing to our channel. Many thanks, and we'll see you on the next Tech Tip.